The woman you arrested is the reason this terminal is no longer under your control. The sentence cut through Jefferson International Airport with more force than any alarm. Every departure screen had turned red. Every boarding gate had locked. The usual rhythm of rolling suitcases, coffee orders, and final boarding calls had vanished beneath a silence so complete that even the hum of the ventilation system seemed too loud. Sergeant Eric Caldwell stood near Gate 42 with one hand resting on his duty belt and the other holding the paperwork he had started only minutes earlier. Beside him, Senator Naomi Carter sat in a mold plastic chair, her wrists secured in front of her, her navy coat still neatly buttoned, her expression calm enough to make the room uneasy. Around them, hundreds of passengers stared from behind security lines and glass partitions, unsure whether they were witnessing a threat or the collapse of a mistake. Then the Homeland Security team entered. They moved quickly but without panic, dressed in dark jackets marked with bold federal lettering. At the center was Monica Hayes, Regional Director of Operations, a woman whose face carried no confusion and no patience for delay. She walked past Caldwell, stopped beside Naomi, and looked down at the small gold pin lying on the polished floor. It was shaped like the dome of the United States Capitol. Caldwell had dismissed it as decoration. Monica did not. "Remove the restraints," she said. Caldwell's jaw tightened. This passenger presented suspicious credentials and refused a lawful inspection. Monica slowly lifted her eyes to him. "That passenger is United States Senator Naomi Carter." A murmur moved through the terminal like wind across dry leaves. Phones rose. Travelers leaned forward. A gate agent covered her mouth. Caldwell glanced at Naomi, then at the credential card on the nearby counter, as though the name printed there had changed since he last looked at it. "That can't be right," he said. Naomi finally spoke, her voice low and steady. "You had the number to verify it." The words landed without anger, which somehow made them heavier. Caldwell looked toward Officer Jason Miller, the younger officer standing several feet away. Jason said nothing, but the uncertainty in his face told its own story. Monica turned toward the security cameras mounted above the gate. "No one leaves this terminal," she announced. "All recorded footage, access logs, body camera files, and detention reports are now under federal protection." Caldwell straightened. "You shut down an entire terminal over an identification mistake." Monica stepped closer. "No, Sergeant. We shut it down because someone attempted to access a protected case file 3 minutes after you detained the senator carrying it." The terminal seemed to hold its breath. Naomi looked past Caldwell toward the locked security doors, then back at the man who had treated her presence as evidence against her. He still believed this was about one arrest. He had no idea that her briefcase contained 47 complaints, 6 missing video records, and a name that appeared more often than any other. His name. 14 minutes earlier, Naomi Carter had entered the airport alone, carrying the truth through a place where Eric Caldwell believed his badge decided who belonged. 14 minutes earlier, Senator Naomi Carter stepped out of a black sedan beneath the wide glass canopy of Jefferson International Airport and watched the morning crowd move around her in hurried streams. Business travelers checked their watches. Families balanced carry-on bags and paper cups of coffee. The cool air smelled faintly of rain, jet fuel, and roasted beans drifting from a nearby cafe. No security detail followed her. No staff member announced her arrival. That was intentional. Naomi had spent 3 months reviewing complaints from black travelers who said they had been questioned, delayed, searched, or removed from boarding lines without clear cause. Most of the reports shared the same pattern. A routine check became a second check. A simple question became an accusation. A request for clarification became evidence of non-compliance. And one name appeared again and again in the files inside her locked briefcase. Sergeant Eric Caldwell. Naomi adjusted the strap over her shoulder and walked toward the security checkpoint with the quiet focus of someone entering a room where the truth had already been warned to keep its voice down. At 52, she had learned that authority did not always announce itself with sirens or raised voices. Sometimes it arrived in silence, carrying notes, dates, and names. Her navy coat was simple. Her shoes were practical. The only visible sign of her office was the small gold capital pin near her collar. Most people did not notice it. Caldwell did. He stood near the entrance to the priority screening lane, broad-shouldered and stiff beneath the bright white lights, watching passengers pass with the expression of a man who believed every doorway belonged to him. His eyes moved from Naomi's face to her boarding pass, then to the leather briefcase in her hand. 3 passengers ahead of her showed their documents and continued without delay. When Naomi reached the scanner, Caldwell stepped directly into her path. "This lane is for verified priority passengers," he said. Naomi held out her boarding pass. "Then I am in the correct lane." Caldwell studied the pass longer than necessary. His mouth tightened. "Where did you get this?" The question was quiet, but the insult beneath it was not. Naomi met his gaze. "From the airline that issued it." A younger officer standing nearby looked up from his monitor. His name tag read Jason Miller. He seemed ready to speak, but Caldwell handed him the pass without looking away from Naomi. "Run it again." Jason scanned the code. A green light appeared. "It is valid," he said. Caldwell ignored him. His attention shifted to Naomi's briefcase. A small federal security seal was fixed near the lock. "Open the case." Naomi kept her voice even. "The contents are protected. You may verify my credentials using the number printed on the card inside my wallet." She placed the identification card on the counter between them. Caldwell glanced at the photograph, then at her face, as though one of them had to be false. Behind Naomi, the line grew longer. Shoes shifted against the floor. A child asked why everyone had stopped. Overhead, a calm voice announced a flight to Denver. Caldwell picked up the card but did not call the number. Instead, he looked toward the screening machine and said, "Send the bag through secondary inspection." Naomi watched him make the decision before any alarm had sounded. That was when she understood the morning had already become evidence. The briefcase moved into the secondary screening tunnel while Naomi remained beside the counter, watching every choice become part of a record no one in that terminal could later pretend not to remember. The conveyor belt hummed beneath the bright ceiling lights. Plastic trays bumped softly against one another. Behind her, impatient travelers checked their phones and shifted their weight, but Sergeant Eric Caldwell seemed almost energized by the attention. He stood with his shoulders squared, one hand resting near his radio, studying Naomi as though patience itself were suspicious. Jason Miller watched the monitor as the briefcase passed through the scanner. A compact encrypted communications device appeared on the screen, along with sealed document folders and a security lock registered to a federal agency. Jason leaned closer. "The seal is authentic," he said. Caldwell did not answer. "The credential matched too," Jason added, quieter this time. Caldwell turned his head just enough to silence him with a look. Naomi noticed everything. The green confirmation light. The timestamp above the monitor. The camera mounted over Caldwell's left shoulder. The supervisor standing 15 feet away with a clear view of the counter. Linda Walsh had arrived moments earlier, drawn by the growing line and the change in Caldwell's tone. She looked at Naomi's identification card, and for half a second, recognition passed across her face. Naomi saw it. So did Jason. "Supervisor Walsh," Naomi said, calm but direct, "please call the federal verification number printed on that card." Linda opened her mouth, then glanced at Caldwell. That hesitation lasted less than 2 seconds, but it told Naomi more than any answer could have. "We need to follow local screening procedure first," Linda said. "Federal verification is part of the procedure," Naomi replied. Caldwell stepped closer to the counter. "You do not tell us how to do our jobs." Naomi held his gaze. "I am telling you how to verify a fact." The passengers nearest the checkpoint had gone quiet. A businessman in a gray suit lowered his coffee. A mother pulled her young son closer. Near the rope barrier, Sophie Bennett raised her phone and began recording, careful to keep it near her chest. Caldwell reached toward the briefcase. Open it. No, Naomi said. One word. No anger. No fear. Just a boundary supported by law. Caldwell's expression hardened. Refusing inspection in a secure airport can be treated as non-compliance. Naomi nodded toward the credential card still lying between them. You have not verified my identity. You have ignored the scanner result. You have dismissed your officer's confirmation. What exactly are you investigating now? The question changed the air. Jason looked down. Linda folded her hands tightly. Caldwell glanced at the watching crowd and seemed to realize that control was beginning to slip away from him. Step away from the counter, he ordered. Naomi did not move. Am I being detained? I said step away. Then state the reason. His radio crackled against his shoulder. Somewhere above them, another flight was called for boarding. The ordinary sounds of the airport continued, but inside that small circle, everything had narrowed to one officer, one woman, and one decision that could still be corrected. Caldwell picked up Naomi's identification card, looked at the verification number, and placed it face down. Jason marked the credential as inconclusive. Jason stared at him. But it cleared. Caldwell's voice dropped. Mark it. Naomi looked at the clock above the checkpoint. 11 minutes remained before her scheduled meeting with Homeland Security, and the man standing in front of her had just ordered the truth rewritten. Jason Miller did not touch the keyboard. The cursor blinked beside the empty status field, waiting for him to turn a verified federal credential into a convenient uncertainty. Sergeant Eric Caldwell stood behind him, close enough for the younger officer to feel the pressure without another word being spoken. Linda Walsh watched from the opposite side of the counter, her eyes moving between Naomi Carter, the scanner results, and the growing line of witnesses. Everyone in that small circle understood what had happened. The identification had cleared. The security seal was valid. The encrypted device had been recognized. The only thing that had failed was Caldwell's willingness to accept the answer. Officer Miller, Naomi said, what did the system display? Jason swallowed. Federal credential verified. Caldwell stepped forward. That is not what I asked you. The sentence was quiet, but it carried the weight of rank, evaluations, and every future shift Jason hoped to work. Imagine knowing the truth is glowing on a screen inches from your hand, while the person above you orders you to dim it. Jason looked at Naomi. She did not plead with him. She did not ask him to risk his career. She simply waited, giving him the dignity of making his own choice. Linda reached for the identification card, then stopped when Caldwell placed his palm over it. We can settle this in the interview room, he said. There is nothing to settle, Naomi replied. There is only something you refuse to verify. Caldwell turned toward the travelers behind the rope barrier. Too many eyes were watching now. Too many phones were visible. His authority no longer looked effortless, and that appeared to trouble him more than the credential itself. Recording security operations may interfere with airport procedure, he announced. Sophie Bennett lowered her phone slightly but did not stop recording. A man near her asked whether Naomi needed a witness. Caldwell pointed toward the concourse and ordered everyone to keep moving. Some obeyed. Others remained where they were. The silence had changed. It was no longer passive. It was observant. Naomi glanced at the clock. 10 minutes remained before the federal meeting. Her chief of staff would already be expecting a secure check-in. The encrypted device inside the briefcase would send an automatic alert if it was opened outside an authorized room. Every system around Caldwell was offering him another chance to stop. He ignored all of them. Supervisor Walsh, Naomi said, you recognize my name. Linda's face tightened. I recognize that I have seen it before. On the briefing notice sent to your office yesterday. Caldwell looked sharply at Linda. She lowered her eyes. That was answer enough. He picked up Naomi's telephone from the counter before she could reach it. The screen lit with an incoming call labeled Federal Operations Center. He looked at the words, silenced the call, and placed the telephone in an evidence pouch. Jason stared at him. "Sergeant, we should answer that." "We should control the scene," Caldwell replied. Then he turned to Naomi. "You are coming with us until we determine who you really are." Naomi looked at the verified card lying face down beneath his hand. "You already determined who I am," she said. "You simply did not like the result." Caldwell ordered Jason to escort her away from the checkpoint. Jason hesitated, then stepped aside rather than block her path. As Naomi moved toward the interview corridor, she passed beneath a security camera and looked directly into its lens. Behind her, Jason quietly pressed a command that copied the full verification log to the protected server. Caldwell did not see him do it. Linda did. And for the first time that morning, someone inside the system chose not to let the truth disappear. The interview corridor was only 30 feet long, but every step through it widened the distance between what the system knew and what Sergeant Eric Caldwell wanted everyone to believe. Naomi Carter walked calmly between Caldwell and Officer Jason Miller while travelers watched from beyond the security barrier. Her briefcase remained on the screening table. Her telephone sat sealed inside a plastic evidence pouch. Her verified identification card was still face down beneath Caldwell's paperwork, hidden not because it was unclear, but because it was inconvenient. At the door to the interview room, Naomi stopped. "Am I free to leave?" she asked. Caldwell glanced toward the watching crowd. "You are being temporarily detained while we investigate possible credential fraud." "Then state the facts supporting that decision." Caldwell's face tightened. "Your refusal to cooperate is supporting it. I offered federal verification 3 times. Turn around." The command was louder than necessary. A few passengers raised their telephones again. Sophie Bennett moved closer to the rope barrier, keeping her camera steady. Naomi looked at Caldwell, then at the body camera mounted on Jason's uniform. "Are both cameras recording?" Jason answered before Caldwell could stop him. "Yes." Caldwell gave him a sharp look. Naomi slowly placed her hands behind her back. There was no struggle. No shouting. Only the small metallic click of the restraints closing around her wrists and the sudden silence of a terminal forced to witness what compliance could not prevent. Her capital pin loosened from her coat and fell to the floor. It landed near Caldwell's shoe. He looked down, picked it up, and turned it between his fingers. "Nice touch," he said. "You think this makes the story believable?" Naomi met his eyes. "No. I think your refusal to verify it makes the story complete." Caldwell placed the pin on the counter and escorted her into the interview room. The walls were pale gray. A clock hung above a narrow table. 9 minutes remained before Naomi's scheduled federal meeting. Caldwell sat across from her and began filling out a detention report. He wrote that she had presented questionable credentials. He wrote that she had resisted inspection. He wrote that she had created a disturbance. Each sentence sounded official. None of them was true. Jason stood near the door, listening as Caldwell transformed calm questions into defiance and lawful boundaries into suspicion. "Sergeant," Jason said, "the screening log shows full verification." Caldwell kept writing. "The system can be reviewed later." It already was. Caldwell finally looked up. "Your job is to support the report." Naomi watched Jason absorb the meaning of those words. This was no longer about airport security. It was about whether truth had to ask permission before entering the record. Caldwell finished the report, signed his name, and leaned back with the satisfaction of a man who believed paperwork could make his judgment permanent. Then Naomi's sealed telephone began vibrating on the counter outside the room. Once. Twice. Again. Through the narrow window, Jason could see the screen lighting up with the same message each time, Federal Operations Center. Caldwell ignored it. Naomi looked at the clock. 8 minutes remained. Somewhere beyond the walls, an automated security system had already noticed that a protected official had missed her required check-in. Caldwell believed he had placed Naomi under his control. In reality, the countdown had just begun. Jason Miller stood outside the interview room with the detention report still open on the terminal screen and the verification log hidden behind it. 8 minutes remained before Senator Naomi Carter's scheduled federal meeting, but the clock above the doorway was no longer the only thing counting down. Her telephone continued to vibrate inside the evidence pouch. The Federal Operations Center called again. Caldwell walked past it without looking. Jason did. The screen displayed a priority security code he had only seen during training, the kind reserved for protected federal officials and active investigations. He returned to the computer and reopened the credential record. The result appeared instantly: United States Senate, identity confirmed, protective status active, verification required through federal command. There was no uncertainty. There had never been any uncertainty. Caldwell entered the room and placed the completed report on the table in front of Naomi. "You will remain here until we determine whether these documents are legitimate," he said. Naomi looked at the report but did not touch it. "You determined that before you brought me here." Caldwell's expression remained flat. "The matter is still under review." "No," Naomi said. "The facts are under concealment." Through the glass, Jason heard every word. He looked at Linda Walsh, who stood near the screening station with her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had watched Caldwell silence the federal call. She had watched him ignore the verification. She had watched him order the report changed. Yet she remained still, trapped between what she knew and what she feared. Jason understood that fear. Caldwell wrote performance reviews. Caldwell assigned shifts. Caldwell had friends in airport administration. Challenging him could end a career before it truly began. But protecting him could end something more important. Jason opened the body camera control panel. The system showed that his recording was active and uploading to the local server. Caldwell's camera, however, had stopped transmitting 3 minutes earlier. Jason checked the log. It had not failed. It had been manually disabled. He copied his own recording to a protected federal evidence folder, then attached the credential verification and the exact time Caldwell had ordered him to mark it inconclusive. His hand hovered over the transmit command. Imagine being 27 years old, wearing a badge you once believed stood for service, and realizing that the most important decision of your career is whether to obey the man beside you or the oath inside you. Jason pressed send. The files left the terminal and traveled to the Federal Operations Center. A confirmation message appeared: evidence received, command notified. At that same moment, Caldwell stepped out of the interview room and saw the open verification screen. "What are you doing?" he asked. Jason turned toward him. Following the result. Caldwell moved closer. "Close it. The credential is valid." "I said close it." Jason did not move. For the first time, the younger officer held Caldwell's gaze without looking away. Behind them, Linda inhaled sharply. Naomi watched through the glass, silent and composed. Caldwell reached for the keyboard, but before his hand touched it, every radio in the corridor crackled at once. A firm voice announced that all personnel were to remain at their assigned positions pending federal instruction. Then the departure screens outside changed from blue to red. Gate agents stopped speaking. Boarding scanners froze. Electronic locks engaged throughout the terminal with a series of measured clicks. Caldwell looked toward the concourse as confusion spread beyond the glass. Jason looked at the confirmation message still glowing on the screen. 7 minutes remained, and the truth had already arrived before Homeland Security did. The first red screen appeared above Gate 42, then another across the concourse, then every departure board in sight changed at once. Federal Security hold. Passengers stopped beneath the glowing displays, searching for delayed flight numbers that had disappeared. Gate agents lifted their telephones and received no answers. Boarding scanners went dark. The glass doors leading toward the aircraft locked with a series of clean electronic clicks. Sergeant Eric Caldwell stepped into the corridor and raised his radio. "Operations, explain this hold." Static answered him first. Then a controlled voice replied, "All airport law enforcement personnel will remain in place. Do not remove records, devices, or detain persons from the terminal." Caldwell looked at Jason Miller. "What did you send?" Jason stood beside the computer, his face tense but steady. "The verification record, my body camera footage, and the order to change the report." For one brief second, Caldwell said nothing. His silence revealed more than anger could have. Linda Walsh moved toward the main desk, where an internal alert had appeared on her monitor. A senior airport administrator named Charles Vance was attempting to enter the restricted complaint archive from an office 2 floors below. The request had been made less than 3 minutes after Naomi was detained. Linda stared at the screen. "That archive contains prior screening complaints," she said. Jason turned toward her. "Including complaints involving Sergeant Caldwell." Linda did not answer, but her expression did. Inside the interview room, Naomi remained seated beneath the clock, her hand still secured in front of her. 6 minutes remained before the meeting that was now moving toward her instead. Caldwell entered and closed the door behind him. "This situation has escalated because your office overreacted," he said. Naomi studied him with the calm patience of someone watching a man build his defense before hearing the charge. "My office did not disable your camera." Caldwell's eyes shifted. "Equipment fails. Your officer preserved the system log." He looked through the glass at Jason. Naomi continued. "My office did not order a verified credential marked inconclusive. My office did not silence repeated federal calls. And my office did not attempt to enter a protected archive after I was detained." Caldwell placed both hands on the table. "You are making assumptions." "No," Naomi said. "I am identifying a pattern." Beyond the room, airport employees were being told to step away from their computers. Federal technicians had begun copying security footage to an external server. Every camera angle, every scanner result, every key card entry, and every revision to Caldwell's report was being preserved before anyone could alter it. The terminal had not been closed to protect Naomi's reputation. It had been closed because evidence was moving, records were at risk, and someone inside the airport had realized the woman in the interview room carried the missing pieces of a larger investigation. A new voice came over the public address system, replacing the usual boarding announcements. "Attention! All passengers and employees must remain in their current areas until further notice. This is a temporary federal security measure." A low wave of concern passed through the concourse. Sophie Bennett kept her telephone recording. The businessman with the gray suit began writing down names. Travelers who had looked away during Naomi's detention were now watching every uniform in the room. Caldwell returned to the corridor and spoke quietly to Linda. "We need to move her before federal agents arrive." Linda stepped back. "The order said no detained person leaves. I am giving you a direct instruction." Linda looked toward Naomi, then toward the red screens above the gates. Earlier, fear had kept her silent. Now silence looked less like safety and more like participation. "No," she said. Caldwell stared at her as footsteps approached from the secured entrance. Dark jackets appeared beyond the glass. The words Department of Homeland Security came into view, and at the center of the advancing team walked Monica Hayes, carrying the authority Caldwell had spent the morning pretending did not exist. Monica Hayes entered the secured corridor with 6 federal agents behind her, and the balance of authority changed before anyone spoke. Sergeant Eric Caldwell straightened his uniform and stepped forward as though posture could protect him from the evidence already moving through federal servers. "I detained a passenger using questionable identification," he said. Monica did not look at him. She looked through the glass at Naomi Carter, then at the restraints around her wrists, then at the verified credential displayed on the nearby monitor. "Open that door," Monica ordered. Linda Walsh entered the access code. The lock released. Monica walked into the interview room and stopped beside the table. "Senator Carter, I apologize for the delay." Caldwell's expression emptied. The travelers beyond the security barrier could not hear every word, but they saw the younger officer remove the restraints and place them on the table. They saw Naomi rise with the same composure she had carried into the airport. They saw Caldwell look at her as though the woman in front of him had suddenly become someone else. She had not changed. Only the truth had become impossible for him to ignore. Monica turned toward Caldwell. "Your detention report states that the credential could not be verified." Jason Miller spoke from the doorway. "It was verified twice." "The passenger refused inspection," Caldwell replied. Naomi adjusted the sleeve of her coat. "I refused to open protected federal material in a public screening area. I provided the correct verification procedure." Monica nodded toward one of her agents, who placed a secured tablet on the table. The screen showed Caldwell's disabled body camera, Jason's preserved recording, the scanner result, and the command ordering the credential marked inconclusive. Then another file appeared. 47 complaints. 6 missing recordings. Repeated changes to detention reports. Caldwell's name appeared across the list. His face tightened. Those cases were reviewed. They were closed without complete evidence, Naomi said. "That is why I came here." The first revelation had been her identity. The second was her purpose. The third was waiting inside the briefcase Caldwell had tried to open. Monica explained that Naomi was leading a joint oversight review into racial disparities in airport security stops. The case file included sworn statements from travelers, internal emails, and access records connected to supervisors across the terminal. Minutes after Naomi was detained, Charles Vance had attempted to enter the protected complaint archive. That attempt triggered the federal evidence hold. The terminal had not been locked because a powerful woman demanded special treatment. It had been locked because someone inside the system had tried to make the truth disappear. Caldwell looked toward Linda. She lowered her eyes. He looked toward Jason. Jason did not. "I followed protocol," Caldwell said. Naomi stepped closer to the table, her voice controlled and clear. "Protocol verifies facts. Prejudice decides before the facts arrive." No one answered. Monica ordered Caldwell's access suspended and instructed the agents to secure every device connected to the complaint archive. Charles Vance was placed under administrative investigation. Linda was separated for a formal interview. Jason handed over his body camera without hesitation. Outside, passengers watched the scene unfold beneath red departure screens, many realizing that the arrest they had witnessed was no isolated misunderstanding. It was a window into a pattern. Caldwell had believed Naomi's silence meant weakness. He had mistaken patience for surrender and compliance for permission. Now every decision he had made that morning was preserved, time-stamped, and waiting for review. Naomi picked up her capital pin from the counter and fastened it back onto her coat. "The investigation continues," she said. This time, nobody questioned whether she belonged there. The terminal reopened 2 hours later, but nothing inside Jefferson International Airport felt ordinary anymore. Departure screens returned to blue. Gate agents resumed boarding calls. Families gathered their bags. Business travelers hurried toward delayed flights. Yet near Gate 42, a section of the screening area remained sealed beneath federal evidence tape. The counter where Naomi Carter's identification had been placed face down was empty now, except for a printed evidence tag and the silent camera above it. Sergeant Eric Caldwell had been removed from duty pending a formal investigation. His access badge no longer opened the doors he had once treated as extensions of his authority. Charles Vance was escorted to a separate interview room while federal technicians copied years of archived records. Linda Walsh sat with investigators and admitted that she had recognized Naomi's name, understood the verification result, and remained silent because she feared retaliation. Her confession was not dramatic. It came in a quiet voice, beneath fluorescent lights, with the exhaustion of someone finally realizing that silence had never been neutral. Officer Jason Miller handed over the complete body camera file and signed a sworn statement describing Caldwell's order to falsify the credential status. Monica Hayes thanked him, but Jason did not look relieved. "I should have spoken sooner," he said. Naomi stood nearby, holding the briefcase that had started the confrontation. "You spoke before the truth was erased," she replied. "Now make sure you speak for the people who never had a federal alert attached to their names." That sentence stayed with him. The investigation expanded before sunset. 47 complaints were reopened. 6 missing recordings were recovered from backup servers. Travelers who had once been told that their experiences could not be confirmed received calls from federal investigators. Names that had been reduced to case numbers became voices again. Naomi refused every suggestion that the story should center only on what had happened to her. She knew the danger of justice becoming a privilege reserved for people with titles. "The point is not that they detained a senator," she told Monica. "The point is that they believed they could treat any black traveler this way and never be questioned." Monica nodded and ordered a full review of detention practices, supervisory conduct, camera controls, and complaint procedures. New safeguards were put in place. No officer could override a verified federal credential without written justification. Body camera interruptions would trigger automatic review. Passenger complaints could no longer be closed without independent approval. Linda agreed to cooperate fully. Jason requested reassignment to the Civil Rights Compliance Unit once the inquiry was complete. Neither decision erased what had happened, but both marked the beginning of accountability. Before leaving, Naomi walked back through the terminal alone. The same polished floor reflected the same white lights. The same coffee shop filled the air with the same warm smell. Travelers moved around her without knowing the full story. Near the checkpoint, Sophie Bennett lowered her telephone and approached. "Senator Carter," she said, "I recorded everything." Naomi looked at the young woman and smiled faintly. "Then keep the original file safe. Truth matters most before people decide it is convenient." Outside the windows, an aircraft lifted into the evening sky. Inside, the sealed counter remained under federal watch. Caldwell had believed his badge gave him the power to define who belonged, who was credible, and whose voice could be ignored. By the end of the day, the system he trusted to protect him was reading his own words back as evidence. He had arrested Naomi because he believed power had a color. But the truth had no color, no uniform, and no need for permission. It simply waited for someone brave enough to let it be seen.